But yeah, without further ado, let's jump into the business here. If you're new to us, what we like to do before we dive into our discussion of Critical Role is recap the episode to get everybody back on the same page. Especially for an episode like this where we've had the off week in between, it's nice to just kind of get things back up to speed.
Right.
And so we cut that recap out and host it separately on YouTube for your viewing convenience. So if you find yourself on that video and want to see our full discussion on the episode, it will be linked down in the description below. So without further ado, I will tackle the first half today of Critical Role Campaign 3, Episode 56, By Goat or By Boat. So,
Story of my life.
we pick up with the crew having just acquired their riding goats, and they are setting off on this trek to Malaismere. It's a bit of a journey, so per usual with travel segments this campaign, Matt is basically having one of the cast members roll for each day of travel. Day one, Deanna rolls, and it's a good day, no no delays or anything. Day two, FCG rolls, and it's a bit of a harder day's travel, but once again, there's not really anything big that happens, no big delays. Frida rolls for day three, and this is when things start to get a little dicey. He rolls poorly. I don't remember the exact number, but they basically run into a blizzard. It starts snowing. Their vision gets obscured, and they end up losing a day of travel. Because of this, they must also make constitution saves, and Chetney and Imogen end up taking 2 points of exhaustion from failing this save. The next day, Imogen rolls and rolls a natural 1,
Yeah.
and she just can't catch a break. And basically, as they're traveling, they come across these like mountain giants that are hurling essentially like these big pieces of ice or snowballs at them. One of them hits FCG and actually, knocks him off his goat. And they decide not to like just stop and fight. They're just going to kind of keep running and see if they can just get away. So one of the giants like starts trying to chase them, and the other one is still hurling snowballs. Imogen uses her telekinesis to kind of like catch a snowball and throw it back. And they're basically beating up on one of the two giants, the one that's chasing them. And it eventually comes to a conclusion when they start like sliding down this mountain of snow to get away. And the giants basically just give up, especially after the one just keeps getting beat down by them. So they kind of like slide all the way down to this mountain. And at the bottom, there is this river, which is kind of one of the ways they could take to get to Malaismere. So they basically kind of sit there and try to decide what they want to do. Are we going to take the river? What are we going to do with the goats? Should we just keep traveling on the land? And after much deliberation, they decide that they're going to try to make a boat, a goat boat. And they're like, that way we can bring the goats with us on the raft. And so they, cut down trees, make a raft, and end up with this 10 by 10 vessel. And this is kind of like a long like segment of them figuring this out. And Matt like keeps hinting that like, hey, these goats are big. They're
Yeah.
riding
Yeah.
goats. And so they're like, they eventually realize like we cannot fit all of these goats with us on this raft. And so they're still trying to decide like,
So
okay, well, what do we do?
surely we could just leave them here, right?
Yeah,
And they,
maybe let's just leave
yeah,
them here. And as they're
yeah,
like discussing this, Deanna just decides to murder one.
yeah.
She
Just full on slits its throat.
just cuts it down, and Chetney just comes in and starts like harvesting the organs and the meat. And it was kind of like a dark but hilarious but brutal moment. Um, and they essentially killed Jerry, which is the name of the goat.
You had to
They
say the
took
name.
out. Yeah. Oh, I skipped ahead one thing really quick, so let me go back. So the night they come to the river, they're figuring all this out. They then actually go to sleep for the night before this discussion continues in the morning. But before they go to sleep, FCG casts the commune spell for the very first time.
Mhm. Yeah.
Which the way this works is FCG is essentially allowed to ask 3 yes or no questions. So the first of which he asks to the Changebringer is, "Are you real?" And it's not as if like the Changebringer like walkie talkies into
Yeah. Right.
FCG's head to answer yes, no. Matt
Yeah.
describes it these different ways that these yeses and nos come to them. So for the purposes of "Are you real?", Matt describes like the wind whipping past, almost like tendrils of hair, stretching out to the horizon, like impossibly far, and like there in the distance, he can kind of see this figure that resembles the Changebringer, and he takes this to be a yes to his question. So the next one he asks is, "Have you been watching me?" So the wind then kind of tears the Changebringer coin that he has in his chest out, and it lands heads up. Um, and FCG is like, thank you. You've helped me a lot already. And so the final question then is, do you need help? And there's this long pause on the horizon, and the tendrils of hair like dance around FCG. And then he can see the figure, again, impossibly far, kind of lift up and like get obscured back into the sky. But he can also see all these other figures that they're returning to. Um, and there's this emotion that is not quite fear, but it's a cold emotion that confirms, yes, she does need help. And then the three questions being gone, the kind of figure
Mhm.
disappears. Then with the final, oh, excuse me. Then before bed that night, the crew is like, Imogen, should you reach out to Laudna in your dream tonight? Just see if you can contact her. But given what happened last time when she tried to do the dream walking after the solstice, she was like, maybe we shouldn't, especially with the exhaustion that I have. So let's not do it tonight. So the party makes their night watches, gets their rest, and Imogen and Chet clear 1 point of exhaustion. Okay, then the next morning they're having this deliberation, and that's when the goat murder happens.
Yeah.
Um, and so the other goats are freaked out. There's this great moment where Fern speaks with animals with one of her goats and is like, what do you want to do? And he's like really freaked out, like, what happened to Jerry? Um,
Yeah.
so Fern basically tells them, hey, all right, you guys stay here in this cove until we get back. There's plenty of meat for you. Just, eat Jerry. And some of them like already have started eating him. So with that being decided, finally, they get on the boat that they made and they start traveling through the river. Um, there's just a bit of a little travel montage here. There's a bit of a discussion about Chetney and lycanthropy and the fact that he bit Frida. And this is the first time that Chetney is finding that out. And they're like, oh, what the heck? Like, is he going to turn? And they don't, Frida doesn't show any signs being worse for the wear, but they won't really know until the next full moon, because that's when, if he was infected, that's when something would happen if it was going to. So Fern rolls for the day's travel and rolls poorly. Matt describes the Savalier Wood kind of like coming to life and all these creepy noises that they can hear as night falls. And they can hear something heavy kind of like crack in the distance as it moves. So Imogen casts Dancing Light to get a better look at things. And they can see these little fairy creatures kind of dancing around something much bigger, kind of like flies surrounding a cow or a horse. Um, and as they get closer, they can see this bog mound type of creature covered in moss and vines with this giant eye stalk that emerges and stares at them. And Imogen moves the lights closer to try and blind it, but as she does, the shape just vanishes. And the next thing they know, it's like bursting through the water, coming straight toward them. And that's where we go to break.
Yeah, so coming back from break, we actually go straight into combat with this creature that Matt calls a bog wretch. And the mini actually looks like a large toad-like creature with tentacles and eye stalks, like on top of it. I guess your typical creature of nightmares. So they are fighting against this bog wretch and these floating pixies that are helping it. And typically, what we do in combat, we just cover the high points. There's gonna be a couple of things that happen. One, most notably, the pixies are all about crowd control. So they're going to cast confusion on Fern, to which Sam's going to say, "Joke's on you. Fern's always confused." So she staves that off. They also cast polymorph on Imogen, who fails the wisdom save and turns into a fox. And then separate from that, the bog wretch is actually going to, with its long curling tongue, grab Frida and begin to pull Frida towards its maw. Deanna's going to do control water to create a sort of tidal surge of water that's going to hit the pixies and break the polymorph almost immediately on Imogen. And unfortunately, we do find that Frida does, in fact, get swallowed whole into this cavity of darkness within the creature, in which the stomach acids begin to digest Frida. Fortunately, the party does quite a bit of heavy hits against the bog wretch. We have inflict wounds. We have a massive nat 20 from Chetney as well. And the bog wretch actually ends up vomiting Frida out of its stomach, and then deciding to make its escape into the water, to which Fern is going to cast Entangling Roots to essentially keep it in place. Another round goes by, and they ultimately end up. I think Chetney casts Shatter, which I didn't realize he had. And it's going to cause a nearby tree to shatter and impale the bog wretch, killing it. And I think the pixies like run away. They're like, "Forget this, we're out of here."
Yeah.
And then Deanna, remembering that Revivify's out, Resurrection's out, Deanna very quickly casts Cure Wounds on everybody to get everybody topped up. So the journey continues. There's more jokes about Aormatons having a death wish because Frida was, so quick to jump into battle, and even after getting digested, was like, "Yeah, that was pretty fun." To which Deanna's like, "What is wrong with you? Like, why are you like this?" And ultimately, they travel deeper into the Savalier Woods towards Malesmere. They're not quite sure where they're going to go, and so Fern actually dips underwater and does speak with animals on this oily black catfish-like creature. It has no eyes, and this is like pristine voice acting from Matt. This
Yes, it
very
was so
much
good.
blurble kind of answers. I was blown away. But basically the fish is like, Fern's like, "Hey, is there anything we need to worry about?" And the fish says, basically describes something called the Wolf King, which the party's like, "Well, what's the Wolf King?" And Chetney naturally is like, "My reputation precedes me." But then they start talking about like, "Hey, weren't you bit by somebody?" And he's like, "Well, I killed that person." But they're also kind of like, "But could it be that person, or did you bite someone else?" Or so it's kind of unclear. But Chetney's not sure who the Wolf King could be. Also, they do get confirmation that there's no waterfalls coming up, which they were worried about, because it's a very like murky, cryptic, kind of swampy area. And in fact, on another days of travel, the party's going to get hit by this creeping black fog that rolls over the raft. Most of them are going to avoid it. However, I think it's Imogen and FCG, Imogen and Fern. I don't actually remember who gets hit by it.
I think it might have been
But
Deanna and
Deanna,
Fern.
okay. Well, they take a point of exhaustion, and they lose their. Actually, yeah, you're right. Fern was definitely one of them. No, they both do, because Deanna says, "Matt, I don't have much health anyway, right?" And
Mhm.
Matt's like, "Now you have even lower," because they take the point of exhaustion, but they also lose 5 maximum hit points. And then Fern's like, "Is this forever?" Or and Matt's like, "Who
You don't know.
knows?" And Deanna is going to try to cast Disenchant. I think for maybe I think on Fern, and Matt explains that this is a curse and not an actual magical effect. There is some more conversation that happens. Uh, uh, Deanna asks Frida if Frida's worried about maybe becoming a werewolf, or like what's going to happen. And, Frida's like, I kind of like the feeling of being scared. But then asks Deanna like, "Hey, how do you pray?" And it's kind of this interesting point, keeping in mind that Frida was kind of like the most agnostic one of the pair. Ends up saying a prayer to the Dawn Father, just asking for safety for the group and especially for Deanna and FCG. Continuing on with the journey, they make their way to Malesmere, this large city, as Matt describes it, with these hulking towers and an enormous amount of trees that have sort of crept over and covered the path as they're entering through the riverboat. And they also see an enormous amount of old bodies, corpses throughout the city. And they're looking for the Guild Hollow Tower. And on the way, they keep hearing this creeping noise. Imogen's going to cast her. It was her red spiritual summon, right? Is what she was bringing up.
Yeah, which I think is a Raylora, presumably.
That's what I thought too, right?
Yeah.
and essentially summons it with a distant sorcery point, um, pretty far out, and it's immediately destroyed by this hulking elk-like 10-foot tall abomination is the best way I can describe it, because Matt describes this elk-like creature with faceless features and like spidery tendrils for legs. Just very
It
terrifying.
was like Dark Souls
Um,
boss,
yeah.
basically.
Oh yeah. Immediately there is a pass without a trace cast on the group, and they begin sneaking their way through the city, ultimately um, trying to avoid this large elk-like creature, but also whatever else could be in the town. And that's essentially where the episode ends, them in search of the Guild Hollow Tower. And that ends episode 56, by goats or by boats, or by boats or by goats. But anyway, full discussion in the comments or in the description below, which let's jump into it.